The Duke's Enchanted Bride Part 2. Chapter 9, Kiss by Moonlight. The moon hung high and full over Greymore Hall that night, silver and swollen like it had secrets to keep. Madeline couldn't sleep. The scroll's words echoed in her mind, not as prophecy anymore, but as reality. She could no longer pretend she was just a seamstress, just a girl who stumbled into magic. She was starborn, the last of a forgotten bloodline, hunted not because of what she had done, but because of what she was. And now she had proof. The scroll was hidden deep in her sewing bag, wrapped in silk and tucked beneath thread and scissors. But it might as well have been carved into her bones. There was no going back. Not to Windmere. Not to the life she used to know. But more than the truth, more than the danger, or the fire in her blood, one thought would not leave her alone. Brandon. He had returned from the capital that evening, long after sunset. She had watched from the upper window as he dismounted his horse and handed the reins to a servant. His posture was stiff with exhaustion, his brow furrowed, and yet, when he looked up at the east wing, he paused. She didn't know if he saw her. But she saw him. And now, under the hush of moonlight, drawn by something stronger than fear or caution, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped from her room. The manor gardens were silent, blanketed in dew and the faint perfume of night blossoms. Stone benches curved around overgrown hedges, and the marble statues, goddesses with broken faces and winged lions with mossy backs, stood like ghosts frozen in thought. Madeline stepped softly through the gravel path, her bare feet quiet. The shawl around her shoulders was thin, but the night air didn't chill her. Not tonight. Not when the world felt so still and waiting. She reached the center of the garden, a crescent-shaped terrace near the fountain. And there he was. Brandon Vine. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, his green coat catching the moonlight in its silver thread embroidery, her stitching. She knew every line of it, and yet seeing him where it now made her heart stutter. As if he sensed her presence, he turned. His face was lit only by moonlight, all harshness melted away in the soft glow. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges, damp from mist. His eyes were shadowed and tired, but when they saw her, they softened. "You couldn't sleep either," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Too much inside me to sleep." He gave a faint nod, then gestured toward the stone bench. She sat. So did he. For a while, they said nothing. Just the rustle of leaves. The gentle splash of the fountain. Somewhere, an owl called. Finally, Madeline whispered, "I know who I am now." Brandon looked at her, expression unreadable. "You found the scroll. I'm the last of the Celestra bloodline. My mother died to protect me. My power isn't just some accident, it's a legacy. And a curse." He leaned forward slightly. "It's not a curse. I destroyed half your library. You left the other half standing," he said with a slight smile. She laughed once, short, breathless. "You're not afraid of me?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I've seen what real monsters look like," he said. "They hide behind titles. Gold. Laws. You hide because you care." Madeline swallowed. Her voice trembled. "You should let me go. Before this gets worse." "I can't," he said, softer now. "I tried. After the masquerade. After the duel in council chambers. I told myself I was being foolish, reckless. That you were a threat. That I had obligations." He turned to her, and there was nothing guarded in his face anymore. "Only truth. But every time I try to walk away from you, something pulls me back." Madeline's breath caught. "And if you're a danger," he murmured, "then I'll face it. Because I'd rather stand in the fire with you than live in the cold without you." She didn't speak. Couldn't. Her heart was thudding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. He reached for her hand, slow and careful, like she might vanish if he moved too fast. His fingers brushed hers. She didn't pull away. The moment stretched, taut and trembling, until he leaned in, close enough to feel his breath. "I don't know what's coming," he said. "But I want to face it with you." And then, as if the stars themselves gave permission, he kissed her. It was not a timid kiss. Not shy or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that came after longing, after fear, after holding too much back for too long. His lips were warm and sure, his hand rising to the curve of her jaw. Her shawl slipped to the ground, forgotten. Madeline melted into him, not as a noble or a soldier or a duke. Just Brandon. And for the first time in her life, her magic did not burn out of control. It glowed. Soft light rose from her skin like moonfire, wrapping around them in a slow spiral of gold. The air shimmered. The fountain stilled. Even the wind seemed to hush. He pulled back only slightly, foreheads touching. "What was that?" he asked, dazed. She laughed, breathless. "That was me, not holding it back." His smile was slow and quiet and filled with something dangerous and tender. "Then don't." But somewhere beyond the garden, hidden deep in the east wing, Seraphina Duskmore stood at her window, watching. And the silver ring on her finger, etched with ancient runes, glowed faintly red. Chapter 10, Branded a Witch. The morning after the kiss brought with it no warmth, only storm clouds. Greymoor Hall stirred with unusual urgency. Servants moved briskly. Horses were saddled. Riders left the manor under the Duke's seal, bound for the capital. And high-born guests, some invited and others lingering like smoke after a fire, whispered in corners and parlors. Madeline felt at the moment she opened her eyes. Something had changed. The kiss had been real. The quiet magic, the way Brandon had held her like she was more than just a flicker of light in his world, it had been the first moment in her life where she had felt truly seen. But even that moment, radiant as it was, had not stopped the world outside from turning. When she emerged from her chamber, the air was heavy with scrutiny. Eyes followed her. Whispers chased her. And before the hour had passed, they came for her. The accusation was swift. She was summoned to the front hall where a small assembly of nobles and advisers waited, faces stiff with duty, veiled in polite malice. Brandon was not among them. Instead, at the head of the gathering stood Lady Seraphina Duskmore, dressed in deep crimson trimmed with black, mourning colors, not for a death, but for a reputation she fully intended to kill. Seraphina held up a sealed parchment, bearing the red wax sigil of the High Council. "By order of the Crown's Magical Enforcement Division," she said, voice calm and clipped, "you are hereby placed under magical inquest for suspicion of unlicensed sorcery and bloodline concealment." Gasps fluttered through the crowd like startled birds. Madeline stood frozen. This was worse than gossip. This was worse than exile. A magical inquest was no idle threat. It meant official investigation by crown mages, interrogation, and likely imprisonment. And if the court judged her guilty, she would be branded a witch, marked with a sigil burned into her skin, stripped of rights, and exiled or executed, depending on the political tides. "Do you deny using magic within the walls of this estate?" Seraphina asked smoothly, as if this were a formal inquiry and not a well-laid trap. Madeline raised her chin. "I used it to save a child's life. To show off at a masquerade, more like," Seraphina snapped. "You've been flaunting your unnatural gifts in the Duke's presence, seducing him into protecting you. It ends now." A ripple of unease passed through the gathered nobles. No one stepped forward to defend her. No one but one voice, calm, low, and commanding, slicing through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." Brandon Vine stood at the top of the stairway, his green formal coat fluttering behind him like a banner, his expression unreadable. He descended slowly, every step deliberate, like thunder waiting to strike. "She is under my protection," he said. "She is under suspicion," Serafina countered. "Even you cannot shield her from royal decree." Brandon walked to Madeline's side, placing himself between her and the council envoys. His voice dropped an octave. "If you move against her, you move against me." The room erupted in gasps. Serafina's eyes narrowed, fury flashing beneath the surface. "You would risk your name, your title, your seat on the High Council, for her?" Brandon didn't blink. Without hesitation. Madeline stood rooted to the floor. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted him to sacrifice anything for her. And yet, in that moment, she knew, truly and fully, that he meant it. Not for politics. Not for show. For her. But Serafina was not finished. She lifted a small, gleaming branding rod, a ceremonial tool only used in the presence of High Council inquisitors. At the tip of the iron was a faintly glowing rune, the witch mark, a cursed seal meant to burn through skin and bind magical ability under royal law. She took a step forward. "Then let it be seen," she said, voice hard as ice. "If she is truly noble, let her face judgment." And without warning, she lunged. The crowd shouted in alarm. Madeline's hand flew up on instinct, and a shockwave of gold light burst from her skin, slamming into the air between them. The branding rod flew backward, landing with a metallic clang on the marble floor. Serafina stumbled, catching herself just short of humiliation, but the air around Madeline now shimmered with starborn fire, swirling like a solar wind. Everyone saw. Gasps turned to screams. And someone shouted the word she'd feared all her life. "Witch." Madeline's hands shook. She hadn't meant to attack. It had been reflex, fear, protection, instinct. But it was too late. She had revealed the very thing they all wanted to see, her power, uncontrollable and radiant. Brandon took her hand. "We're leaving," he said, loud enough for all to hear. Serafina recovered quickly, smiling with venom. "You'll be fugitives by nightfall." Brandon didn't look back. "Then light the road for us." And with that, he pulled Madeline through the crowd, her feet barely touching the floor, past stunned servants and furious nobles, and into the waiting night. They stood in the stables, the storm finally breaking overhead. Rain fell in torrents, soaking through cloaks and cloaking the manor in mist and shadow. Madeline watched as Brandon prepared 2 horses in silence, his jaw clenched, every movement precise. "I didn't mean to," she began. He stopped her with a glance. "You didn't have a choice. I've branded myself now. Just like they wanted." "No," he said. "They tried to brand you with shame. You showed them truth. That's not the same." She looked at him, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Where do we go?" He met her eyes, and something in his gaze softened. "Where they can't find us. Where you can learn what you are. And where you'll be safe. Until we're ready to come back. To fight. To take back what was stolen. From you. From your family. From the realm." She hesitated, then reached for his hand. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "Good," Brandon murmured. Because this was only the beginning. And as the thunder cracked above them and the horses galloped into the storm, the estate behind them burned with whispers, of love, of prophecy, and of the starborn witch who defied them all. Chapter 11, Secrets of the Magister. They rode until dawn. Through pouring rain, over flooded paths and crumbling stone bridges, past forests that whispered and hills that hid old scars, Madeline and Brandon galloped east, away from Greymoor Hall, away from the accusations, and away from the only life either of them had ever known. The storm followed them for miles, its cold hand clawing at their cloaks. But eventually, as the first blush of morning crept over the horizon, the clouds broke. The rain slowed to mist, and the golden light of dawn revealed what lay ahead. A narrow road lined with black-barked trees. A stone archway carved with ancient runes, half swallowed by moss. And beyond it, nestled into the cliffs of the Arlan Valley, stood a tower, crooked, ivy-choked, and pulsing with residual magic. The Tower of Hollowmere. Few remembered it. Fewer dared to speak of it. But Brandon knew it well. As a boy, he had been brought here in secret, trained in the art of court strategy, magical theory, and warcraft by a man whom even the High Council feared to cross. Magister Elias. The heavy door creaked open before they even knocked. Elias stood in the entry hall, older now than Brandon remembered, but no less commanding, white robes trimmed with silver, his staff carved from starwood, and his gaze sharp as ever. "I thought it might be you," the Magister said, as if they'd arrived precisely on time for an appointment. Brandon dismounted and helped Madeline from her horse. She swayed slightly, pale from exhaustion. Elias's eyes flicked to her glowing birthmark, still faintly visible at the base of her throat. "So," he said softly, "the last star is rising." Madeline blinked. "You knew about me?" "I did," he said, not unkindly. "Though I never thought the realm would be foolish enough to let you awaken." "Awaken?" she echoed. Elias turned and motioned them inside. "Come. You'll need answers before the storm finds you again." The tower's interior was stranger than Madeline had imagined. Walls shifted subtly when she wasn't looking. Mirrors lined the halls, some clear, others clouded with frost or fire. Books floated midair in private orbits. The hearths burned with blue flame, and time itself seemed to stretch or bend depending on which stairway she chose. Eventually, Elias led them to a vaulted room ringed with mirrored pillars. The air thrummed with ancient energy. He gestured for her to sit. Brandon stood just behind her, silent, watchful. Elias faced them, his staff planted firmly on the stone floor. "You are the last of the Celestra line," he began. "A bloodline not just magical, but mythic. Your ancestors were the architects of balance in Eldoria, mediators between the mortal and the arcane." Madeline frowned. "But, the histories say we were traitors. That the starborn sought to overthrow the throne." Elias snorted. "A lie. Convenient and well-funded. Your people tried to reform the crown, not destroy it. They challenged the council's right to control magic by birthright alone. For that, they were branded heretics. Burned. Erased." He waved a hand, and one of the mirrors rippled like water. Inside it, Madeline saw a woman with her same eyes, standing tall in a storm of fire, arms outstretched, not attacking, but shielding. Soldiers rushed her. Behind her, a child was being carried away by a figure cloaked in moonlight. "My mother," Madeline whispered. "And me." Elias nodded. "That memory lives in your blood. That magic is your inheritance." Brandon stepped forward. "And what of the prophecy?" Elias's expression darkened. "The last starborn shall rise in an age of crumbling thrones. Her birth shall split kingdoms. Her flame shall reveal what the council buried. But power does not rise alone. A shadow shall follow, ancient, patient, and waiting to strike." Madeline's blood turned cold. "Seraphina," she said. "She's part of it." "No," Elias replied grimly. "She is a pawn. The true shadow is older. The Ashen Circle, a sect of sorcerers that served the first corrupt kings of Eldoria. Thought extinct. They've returned, wearing court masks and noble titles. And they will not allow the starborn to reclaim what was lost." Brandon's fists clenched. "They'll come for her again," he said. Elias nodded. "And next time, they won't stop at a branding rod. Elias turned to Madeline again. You have days, perhaps less, before your name spreads to every hunting list in the kingdom. You must learn control. Not the kind taught by frightened nobles, but true command of your gift. He gestured toward a stone basin in the center of the chamber. Place your hand inside. Madeline stepped forward. The water glowed faintly with starlight. She placed her hand into the basin. Pain flared, sharp, searing, and then cold. Visions rushed into her mind. Flames consuming a battlefield. A crown cracked in two. A voice whispering her name, over and over. A tree of silver leaves growing from blood-stained ground. And then. Brandon. Not as he was now, but cloaked in gold light, standing beside her at the edge of a battlefield, sword drawn. Not protecting her. Fighting with her. She gasped and pulled back. Elias was already at her side. You are more than prophecy, child, he said. You are choice. That is what the council fears most. Brandon stepped beside her, voice steady. What do we do now? Elias looked between them, eyes filled with knowledge and weariness. Now, he said, we begin preparing for war. And high in the towers of the capital, as Madeline trained and Brandon planned, Seraphina knelt before a circle of shadowed figures, whispering in an ancient tongue. Her eyes glowed faintly red. The ashen circle had heard the call. And they were ready to answer. Chapter 12, The Betrayal at Windmere. It was nearly midnight when Madeline saw her hometown again. From the crest of the hill where her horse now stood, Windmere looked smaller than she remembered, a patchwork of dark roofs and sleepy lantern-lit windows nestled between the whispering trees of the outer forest. Fog clung to the edges of the village, turning familiar paths into haunted roads, and yet, something about it called to her like a distant lullaby. Brandon sat beside her, cloaked in black, his gaze cautious. We shouldn't stay long, he said. I know, Madeline replied softly. But I had to see it. One last time. The Tower of Hollowmere had become their sanctuary these past few days, a place of training, revelation, and increasingly dangerous visions. Madeline had begun to feel her power growing like a tide beneath her skin, guided by Elias's sharp instruction and Brandon's unwavering presence. But there were things she needed from Windmere. Answers. Memories. Loose ends. And most of all, Lila. Her oldest friend. Her confidant. The girl who had stitched dreams with her in the back of the seamstress shop, who had giggled over noble gossip and wept with her after her mother died. If there was anyone in the world Madeline still trusted beyond Brandon, it was Lila. Or so she thought. The bell above the door still sang its same soft chime as Madeline stepped inside, though it sounded older now. Sadder. The shop hadn't changed. The same bolts of half-used cloth, the same worn counter. Even the wall sketch of the noblewoman's gown still hung there, faded but intact. Lila appeared from the back, a candle in her hand and confusion on her face. Maddie, she whispered. Madeline smiled with real warmth. I'm here. The two women embraced tightly. For a brief, fleeting moment, Madeline let herself feel the comfort of home, of childhood, of not being hunted. You're alive, Lila breathed. They said, you vanished. There were rumors. That you were taken. Or worse. Madeline pulled back and placed a hand on her friend's cheek. I didn't disappear. I was forced to run. Lila frowned. Because of the magic? Madeline nodded. I'm starborn. A beat of silence passed. Lila's hands fell to her sides. Madeline pressed on, I came back to warn you. Seraphina's reach is longer than I thought. She has ties to the Ashen Circle. She might come for anyone close to me. You have to be careful. Lila took a step back, eyes wide with something Madeline couldn't name. Not fear. Something worse. Regret. I have to tell you something, Lila said, voice trembling. Madeline's heart tightened. What? But the front door opened before Lila could answer. And they walked in. 5 cloaked figures, wearing silver-trimmed uniforms of the council enforcers, the magic hunters. Behind them stood a woman cloaked in violet, her voice cool and cruel. Madeline Dawson. You are under arrest for treason, magical sedition, and unlawful invocation of ancient powers. Seraphina Duskmore stepped from the shadows like a blade drawn from its sheath. Madeline spun to Lila. You told them? Tears welled in Lila's eyes. They came to me. Said if I didn't help them, they'd arrest my family. I didn't know she'd come herself. Madeline felt something inside her fracture. But Seraphina's smile was the worst part, the way she savored the moment like fine wine. We tracked you from the tower, she said. But we needed confirmation. And you delivered yourself to my doorstep like a good little lamb. Madeline backed away slowly, her palms glowing faintly gold. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Seraphina said. Come quietly and we'll make your execution swift. I'm not dying today, Madeline growled. And I'm not letting you touch her, came Brandon's voice from the doorway. He strode in without hesitation, sword in hand, cloak dripping rainwater. He moved like a storm, quiet but deadly. Seraphina's eyes flashed. You came too. How charming. Will you die with her? No, he said. I'll kill for her. The battle erupted in seconds. Brandon struck first, blade glowing with enchanted runes, slicing through one enforcer's shoulder in a blur of motion. Madeline raised her hands, summoning a barrier of gold light that shattered a lightning spell aimed for her back. Shelves splintered. Cloth caught fire. Mirrors cracked. Seraphina herself hurled a bolt of deep crimson magic, not council legal, but dark, forbidden, rooted in blood. Madeline blocked it with a cry, but the backlash threw her into the wall, pain searing her ribs. Brandon was already at her side. Can you stand? Yes, she gasped. But I'm done running. She pushed him aside, raised both hands, and her birthmark exploded with light. Gold and silver fire burst from her fingertips, weaving into a radiant storm that tore through the shop. The remaining enforcers screamed and fell back, their armor scorched. Even Seraphina stumbled, shielding her eyes. Lila cried out from the corner, not in pain, but awe. Terror. The magic finally stopped. The room was scorched. Broken. Glowing. Madeline stood at the center, hair loose and eyes burning with power. Seraphina, breathing hard, pulled a silver pendant from around her neck, marked with the Ashen Circle's sigil. You've chosen the wrong path, she spat. There's no place for you in this world. I'll make one, Madeline said. With fire, if I must. Brandon pulled her toward the back exit. Now. They fled through the alleyways, disappearing into the woods, the fog swallowing them whole. Madeline sat by a small fire, arms wrapped around her knees. Brandon tended to a scratch on his arm in silence. Lila's betrayal still rang in her ears. I should have known, she said. She was scared. But I trusted her. She chose survival, Brandon said gently. So did you. Madeline stared at the flames. The world is darker than I thought, she whispered. And so am I. He moved beside her, took her hand, and pressed it to his heart. Then let's burn together. And above them, the stars began to gather, flickering, watching, as if even the sky could feel that war had begun. Chapter 13, The Duel of the Dukes. The summons arrived not by letter, but by blade. At dawn, as the mist lifted from the forest clearing where Madeline and Brandon had been hiding, a courier rode into camp, alone, unarmed, and pale as death. He dismounted, his eyes fixed not on Madeline, but on Brandon. He knelt, and in both hands, offered a sheathed ceremonial sword wrapped in violet silk, the duel vex, the ancient symbol of a formal combat challenge. A duel had been called. By law, it could not be refused. The name inscribed in silver on the scroll tied to the hilt made Brandon's face harden like carved stone. Lord Cale Redwine. Madeline recognized the name. Everyone in Eldoria did. A rival noble house. Ambitious. Cold. Ruthless. And an open ally to Seraphina Duskmore. Lord Cale had once been Brandon's childhood friend. That bond had long since rotted into contempt, but now it was war. Cale's challenge was simple: Brandon must surrender Madeline, denounce her publicly, and reaffirm his allegiance to the High Council. Or duel to the death. Brandon didn't hesitate. I accept. 3 days later, they stood on the banks of the Thorn River, on a flat stretch of sun-baked earth known as the Field of Blades, a site sacred to dueling nobility for over 400 years. Hundreds gathered. Nobles and peasants alike. Word of the challenge had spread across the realm like wildfire. Whispers swirled in the air like dust. The starborn girl will be there. The Duke of Greymoor fights for a witch. If he loses, the council will burn her publicly. A thin wooden dais had been constructed at the center. On it stood Lady Seraphina, resplendent in black and red, her expression unreadable behind a veil of gauze. Near her, seated under a white canopy, sat council witnesses, brought from the capital to record the duel's outcome. If Brandon died, Seraphina would have her victory, and Madeline would be branded before sunset. If Cale died, the nobles might riot. No one truly wanted blood, but no one wanted peace either. Madeline stood at the edge of the crowd, cloaked, her breath shallow. She watched Brandon mount the dueling platform dressed not in ceremonial armor, but in the green coat she had stitched, the one with her hidden constellation sewn into the lining. Her mark. His cause. Lord Cale wore black etched with cold silver, his blade sheathed in dragonbone. His smile was mocking, calm. "You've fallen far, Brandon," Cale said as the two squared off. Fighting for a girl who should have been drowned at birth. Brandon's voice was ice. Better to fall in love than rot standing. They drew blades. The crowd fell silent. Then the first clash of steel rang out, clear and sharp. Cale moved like water, smooth, deliberate, honed by years of training in the court academies. Brandon fought like storm and stone, efficient, brutal, every strike made to end, not impress. Back and forth they moved across the platform, sword to sword, sweat gleaming beneath the morning sun. Magic surged faintly around them, Cale using shadow binding to twist Brandon's footing, Brandon countering with brief bursts of shield wards woven into the steel of his blade. The crowd gasped as Brandon stumbled briefly, Cale's blade grazing his side. From the edge of the field, Madeline felt her heart stop. Brandon steadied, teeth clenched. Blood darkened the green of his coat. Cale grinned. Still standing. Brandon didn't answer. Instead, he surged forward with a roar, disarming Cale in 3 sweeping strokes, the last of which sent Cale's sword clattering across the dueling platform and into the dust. Brandon placed his own blade at Cale's throat. The crowd held its breath. Cale chuckled. "Go on, then. Finish it. Show them what a traitor truly looks like." But Brandon didn't move. He dropped the sword. "I won't kill you," he said. "Because your death would make you a martyr." He turned to the crowd. "But let it be known, who would die for her." He extended his hand toward Madeline. "And I would live for her." Madeline stepped forward, hood slipping back, her face full of fire and tears. Gasps erupted. Cries rang out from the nobility. Some shrieked, "Witch!" Others clapped. The crowd was split. The line between old world and new had been drawn. And Brandon Vine had chosen his side. That night, in a tent outside the city border, Madeline stitched a fresh bandage over Brandon's wound. He winced but didn't pull away. "You dropped your sword," she said. "I'd already won." "They hate us more now," she whispered. "I know. They'll never stop." He reached up, fingers brushing her jaw. "Neither will I." Then he leaned in and kissed her, gently, reverently, like a vow. And beneath the canvas of their quiet sanctuary, with stars blazing through the holes in the ceiling like a crown, Madeline swore to rise, not just for herself, but for every girl with power in her veins who had been told to stay small. Chapter 14, Fire in the Archives. The fire began with silence. No screams, no smoke, not at first. Just a shift in the air, like the heartbeat of Eldoria itself had paused. Then, from the center of the capital's grand archive tower, light, unnatural, flickering, wrong, glowed against the night sky. And the world changed. Madeline sat at a carved oak table in the inner chamber of Magister Elias's private library, surrounded by scrolls and maps, her fingers stained with ink. Brandon stood beside her, arms crossed, tension thrumming through him like a bowstring. They had found it, a reference to a sealed archive beneath the capital's high temple. An underground vault containing the royal record of magic, including bloodline registrations, spell restrictions, and most importantly, the original, unredacted records of House Celestra. If those documents were retrieved and exposed to the public, if Madeline could prove she was not a threat, not a criminal, but a noble of true and ancient lineage, the council's authority would be shaken. Seraphina's accusations would unravel. The balance of power would tip. "It's time to stop hiding," Madeline said. "Time to show them who I am." But Elias's warning was clear. "You must move quickly. If Seraphina suspects your plan, she will destroy everything to keep the truth buried." Under cover of night, Madeline, Brandon, and a pair of cloaked Hollowmere loyalists slipped into the city. Hidden by magical veils and Elias's illusions, they bypassed the usual checkpoints and made their way beneath the high temple. There, behind a door etched in starlight and bound with 3 enchanted locks, lay the deep archive. Madeline felt her breath catch as the door creaked open. Dust drifted like forgotten dreams. Inside, shelves stretched into darkness, miles of sealed tomes, enchanted parchment, and memory crystals pulsing faintly with stored visions. She moved as if in a trance, drawn by instinct, by something deeper than memory. Finally, she found it, a narrow silver-bound codex wrapped in protective runes. Celestra, Bloodline Ledger, Final Entries. With trembling hands, she opened it. There, in elegant ink. Alia Celestra, executed for treason, wrongful. Sarah Celestra, deceased. One surviving heir, female, unnamed, hidden. Noted by royal scribe under duress. Proof, she whispered. They knew. They knew and they covered it. Brandon took the book and held it to his chest. Let's get it back to the tower. Once we show the circle of crowns, they won't be able to deny. He stopped mid-sentence. Smoke. A faint hiss in the distance. Then heat. And then flames. The trap had been set the moment they entered. Outside, a second squad of Hollowmere loyalists were ambushed. Cloaked figures wearing Ashen Circle insignia had followed them. Magic wards had been broken. Explosives, alchemical firebombs, had been placed strategically throughout the underground library. And now they were igniting. Go! Brandon shouted, drawing his blade. Madeline grabbed the codex and turned toward the exit, but the corridor had already collapsed in flame. A burst of fire slammed into the ceiling, and stone rained down. She fell, barely shielding herself in time. The codex flew from her hands and skidded across the marble floor, straight into the rising wall of fire. "No," she screamed. Brandon grabbed her arm. "We have to move." But the codex, the proof, was now engulfed in blue flames. Madeline lunged forward, summoning her magic. Her hands glowed gold as she pushed against the inferno, sweat pouring down her brow, the smell of burning ink filling her lungs. She reached the edge of the codex, her fingers blistering. And then the flames flared with unnatural force. An explosion of dark magic, not alchemical, not fireborn. Cursed flame. It knocked her backward with brutal force. Brandon caught her before she hit the ground, shielding her with his body. When the light cleared, the codex was nothing but ash. Gone. They fled through a back passage Elias had marked on an old map, half collapsed, overrun with vines and forgotten magic, but still intact. Behind them, the Grand Archive roared with flame, sending plumes of black smoke into the Capitol skyline. Madeline stumbled through the tunnel, heart hollow. She had risked everything, and now the one artifact that could have changed everything was destroyed. They emerged into an alleyway, soaked in soot and sweat. Brandon touched her face. "We're alive. But the truth isn't," she whispered. "They won." "No," he said, eyes flint hard. "They silenced the scrolls. But not you." Far above the burning tower, in a silk-draped chamber high in the palace spire, Seraphina Duskmore stood at her window, watching the smoke. Behind her, a robed figure stepped into the candlelight, a man with silver eyes and ash-pale skin. "My lady," he said, bowing low. "The archive burns. The starborn will have no proof." Seraphina smiled faintly. "Good. Now let the people call her a witch. Let them forget her name." She raised her hand. A magical brand, the Ashen Circle's sigil, shimmered faintly beneath her sleeve. "This is a war of symbols," she whispered. "And I intend to make her a curse in every tongue of Eldoria." Madeline sat in the tower's observatory, wrapped in a blanket, staring into nothing. Elias entered, silent. "I failed," she said without looking up. "You lost a scroll," he said. "Not a legacy." She turned to him, eyes rimmed in fire and tears. "Then help me," she said. "Train me. Make me someone they can't erase." And Elias nodded. "It's time you stopped being hidden, and started being remembered." Chapter 15, Escape to the Silver Woods. Night fell like a curtain of iron. The flames that had devoured the Grand Archive still smoldered in the distance, casting an angry glow into the horizon behind them. Ash rode the wind. The very air of the kingdom felt burned, like the truth itself had been scorched from its bones. And yet Madeline Dawson ran. Through bramble and field, through gnarled root and mist-heavy glade, she and Brandon fled into the wild, leaving behind the roads, the cities, the courts, and the names that no longer protected them. They had become more than outlaws now. They were symbols. To the council, she was a witch and a traitor. To the Ashen Circle, a threat to be extinguished. And to those who whispered in the taverns and alleyways of Eldoria, she had become something far more dangerous. Hope. They crossed into the Silver Woods just before dawn. The forest was older than the kingdom itself, a vast, enchanted wilderness untouched by blade or fire. The trees here were unlike any other, tall and pale as moonlight, with bark that shimmered faintly under starlight and leaves that whispered secrets in forgotten tongues. No road passed through. No map marked its trails. Only legend spoke of what lay within, illusions, guardians, forgotten shrines, and something deeper. Something that watched. Few who entered came out again. But Elias had spoken of a place buried in the heart of the woods, a sanctuary woven from magic itself, once used by the starborn as a place of refuge and communion. "The veiled glade," he'd whispered. "If you can reach it, you may find more than rest. You may find awakening. They set up camp beneath a twisted canopy of trees whose branches arched overhead like cathedral ribs. Brandon kept watch as Madeline stared into the fire, her face cast in soft gold and flickering shadow. She hadn't spoken much since the archive had burned. Since the last proof of her legacy had turned to smoke in her hands. But silence wasn't the same as surrender. Her eyes burned with focus now. She trained harder each day, letting Elias's lessons settle into her bones. Her power had begun to respond faster, clearer, still wild, but no longer untamed. Still, something felt different in the woods. Even her magic responded strangely. Spells flickered with unfamiliar color. Her hands tingled constantly, and her dreams had begun to twist, visions of silver rivers, singing stars, and shadows with golden eyes. Madeline, Brandon said softly from beside her, we should sleep in shifts. She nodded, but didn't lie down. Her eyes kept drifting toward the deeper woods, as though something invisible pulled at her ribs. I feel like we're being watched, she murmured. Brandon's hand went to his sword. We're not alone. By the second day, the forest had changed. Paths shifted behind them. Landmarks vanished. Birds did not sing. No prey moved. Even the sunlight felt wrong. Dimmed. Slanted. They began to see illusions, a flicker of windmere out of the corner of Madeline's eye, the scent of fire when there was none, the sound of her mother's lullaby whispered through the trees. Wards, Madeline said, panting. The whole forest is warded. For protection? Brandon asked. Or, to test. It wasn't until the third night, when Madeline found herself standing in a clearing she couldn't remember walking into, that she understood. There was no sky. No birds. Only a mirror-still pool of water at the center of a ring of silver-leafed trees. The moment she stepped into the clearing, Brandon was gone, vanished like smoke. Brandon? No answer. Then the pool shimmered. Madeline stepped toward it and saw not her reflection, but herself as a child, sitting beside her dying mother, weeping in a pool of golden light. Then the image shifted, to her healing the baker's daughter. To Brandon holding her hand in the garden. To the archive in flames. Then, to her alone, standing over a battlefield, her gown torn, her eyes glowing, and no one at her side. Who are you, Madeline Dawson? A voice asked, not from the forest, but from inside her mind. She trembled. I'm no one. Wrong. The voice became a chorus. Dozens. Hundreds. You are the flame they buried. The name they struck. The star they couldn't reach. I'm not ready, she whispered. No one ever is. Light cannot wait for permission. It rises. Her chest ached. Her birthmark burned. Then the pool exploded with light, not fire, not water, but something older. A magic that was not drawn from spell or script, but from her blood. Madeline collapsed to her knees as a crown of silver starlight shimmered around her head, then vanished. When she opened her eyes, Brandon was beside her, eyes wide. I turned around and you were gone, he said. The forest swallowed you. She blinked, trembling. I think I passed its test. They followed the stream beyond the pool and came upon it at last, a clearing hidden behind a veil of woven starlight. The veiled glade. An ancient shrine stood at its center, half swallowed by moss, surrounded by floating lanterns that pulsed with residual starborn energy. The air here was warm. Safe. Sacred. Madeline stepped into the center, where an altar of moonstone rose from the earth. Etched into it, in runes older than any tongue she knew, were 6 words. She who remembers shall awaken all. Her heart slowed. Her breathing steadied. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel afraid of her magic. She embraced it. Brandon stood beside her, silent, watching her with awe and something like devotion. "You're not the girl I met in Windmere," he whispered. "No," she said, voice soft but strong. She was asleep. She turned, and in her eyes now blazed the fire of something reborn, not just a survivor, not just a witch, but a starborn heir, awakened at last.
Across every empire, every forgotten age, stories still whisper. If this tale stirred your spirit, leave a like to honor the echoes of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice weaves a new legend into the sands of time. And subscribe to our YouTube channel Historical Fantasy Stories, where myths walk beside history, and every discovery changes the world. The next forgotten legend is waiting to be found.